Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. On today's episode of Extraordinary, God's Uncommon Works, I have a conversation with VanBuskirk about mental disorder, specifically obsessive compulsive disorder, and how that can impact our life, but also how God can help us thrive and see us through. So let's get into the conversation with Chris. Well, Chris, thank you for being on the podcast today as we explore God's uncommon works in common life. I appreciate you being here with us today.
It's my pleasure, Pastor Jeff. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, as we begin, I wondered if you could share a little bit about your professional journey, from music to IT to the hospital to anything you would like to share. Tell us about your professional journey.
Going way back, because I'm getting pretty old now, I graduated high school and decided that I wanted to study music. I also liked playing sports. I played basketball and I played baseball, and I was going to try to do both. I went to a smaller college. I was going to try to play basketball and do music, but things didn't really work out. Another thing is, if for those who know anything about a music major, is it's probably theoretically impossible, physically impossible to be a music major and play sports at the same time, because they both demand so much time outside of class that there's not that many hours in the day. But I went to college to study music. I changed my major at least once to English, and then I eventually ended up over at Western Illinois studying music, and they had a really nice music program over there, and was on my way to finish a degree to be a music teacher. And I think I was poor and I needed some money. I had an interest in computer kind of stuff. Someone might say I was kind of a super user. I think in my personality, which I think is kind of also your personality too, but I think we're supposed to talk about me right now, but if you want to jump in, I don't like not understanding things, and I don't like ending with, I just can't figure this out, this just doesn't work. So often with computer stuff, especially like Microsoft Office programs, I may sit there until 2 or 3 in the morning doing searches, trying different things, trying to figure something out, trying to make something work. And to where maybe someone who has a different personality type may, after about 2 minutes, have just thrown in the towel and said, I'm moving on. I think I was poor, and I needed to make some money, and I went to the temp agency, and they have you test certain things to see what you're good at, what you know how to do. I tested really high in like Microsoft Office programs. Coincidentally, the hospital at the time, and I don't remember what it was called. I think it was Great River at the time. In administration, they were looking for somebody temporarily to assist in a secretary position. They wanted especially skill sets in Microsoft Office and things like that. So went through that, interviewed, and got hired. And again, it was a temporary position. I think it was part-time. And by actually the physical proximity of where my desk was, I was one of the, Merry Christmas to a lot of people, the first face that a lot of people saw coming down to administration. So based on traffic, I had gotten to know a lot of people. And if I remember correctly, I think it was the director of IS at the time asked me if I was interested in that position. And of course, my response was, I don't have any IT background. I'm, working to hopefully finish a music education degree. I could hopefully teach music right now, but I don't have any background in IT. And he seemed to think that was okay. That from what he had seen and observed, that I had the skill sets, at least to start with, that they're looking for, and hopefully it could grow from there. And I said, okay. And I did an interview, I think if I remember correctly, with him and who the gentleman who's my boss today. And I remember sitting there telling him, I don't know if I'm really qualified for this. And they thought that I was. And so they hired me down there. And that worked great. I just tried to learn as fast as I could. I would identify, who's been around for a while, who knows what, and would ask questions. I would do tons and tons of reading, whether it was online or spent a good chunk of change buying lots of books. And as a music director of the church, it's always been important to me, even when I'm working with adults, because I don't think we ever stop learning, to approach the music that we do from an educational standpoint, and try to be an agent that helps those participating also grow in their understanding of music and grow in their music skills. So I still think I get to teach music. I just don't officially do it in a school, and I don't have a certificate for it.
Yeah.
So that's how I got from music to doing IT.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Chris, and your journey. I appreciate that. You alluded to your personality throughout that, and you have been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. Can you explain what that is and how that's impacted you on your journey, as well as maybe some frustrations that you encounter that others might not think of?
Sure. Yeah, it's had a major impact. It may be the most major, and I know some people like, hasn't God had the most impact on your life? Well, of course, and of course, where I'm headed, especially when we talk about the great hope. But in terms of where I thought I was going, and how things ended up being, were just incredibly influenced by a condition called obsessive compulsive disorder. And in my opinion, and again, this is an unprofessional opinion, but I've done lots of reading and I've had lots of counseling. I've seen different psychiatrists for the condition. It's something that I believe that is very genetic, and something that is inherited. It's something that is very prevalent in my family, and going back, it looks like possibly generations. And it's been something that my wife and I have an awareness of, and we watch our children's behavior, knowing that they may have a predisposition to that kind of mental condition. And it's amazing. I have intentionally done things to not try to aggravate that kind of I'll say behavior, and I'll get into that in just a second, or ways of thinking. And you see the child just naturally do things in ways, and you're sitting there, and it's gotten to the point, one of my sons, and I'll talk to him about it, and I can tell that he listens. And my wife will say that. She'll say, when you start talking to him, she'll say, he's listening. And I can tell he's dealing with things, and I think it's things that I was dealing with at that age, and I didn't know that anything was wrong. I didn't know. No one knew that there was something different about maybe how my brain works and other people's brains work. And he'll be best way I can say it, if you've seen Rain Man and some of the fits that he has, he'll be having one of those kinds of fits, and I'll start talking to him, and I'll say, I know this is probably what your brain is doing right now, and it's probably saying this, and this is causing you anxiety, and then it goes here, and you can kind of see him kind of perk up and be like, what someone actually understands this, and there's this idea when you go through this, and especially if you haven't been diagnosed, you think you're crazy. And I guess that's a segue into you said what is obsessive compulsive disorder, and often called OCD. And again, I'm not a professional. This is what I know about it. Um, it's from a family of anxiety disorders, but to my understanding, the psychiatrists and psychologists, they give it its own special diagnoses, and it shares a lot of similarities with other types of anxiety disorders, but there's some things that are unique to obsessive compulsive disorder. And to really break it down is that the O is obsessive, and that deals with thoughts and obsessive thoughts, to where someone has things pop in their brain, and to where other people have the ability to maybe just say, I'm just going to forget about it. They can't. They don't know how to. Because believe me, I've tried. And it starts to become a problem, because often those thoughts, there's a fear that's associated with the thoughts, and what it all boils down to is really the fear, and the fear associated with the thoughts causes anxiety, and anxiety is uncomfortable, and as anxiety increases, it can start manifesting itself physically, and with me it has in so many ways. Again, it started to affect athletics, affect my ability to do music, especially singing, because proper singing is, especially when you study singing, a lot of it is trying to remove tension, especially around your pharynx and your vocal cords and things like that. Well, of course, when you have anxiety, sometimes that's exactly where that anxiety will physically manifest itself. People can get headaches. One time I was having numbness in all four extremities, and providers and myself, I think, started to agree that it was a result of just anxiety. So obsessive compulsive disorder is this idea where you have these thoughts, and with these thoughts you have fears, and you can't just get them out of your head. So the compulsion comes in where your brain, for whatever reason, is inclined to come up with some kind of behavior to satisfy whatever the obsessive thought seems to be afraid of. And there's all kinds of common ones, and there's some books out there, and one of them is called like the Obsessive Compulsive Disorder Handbook. And it's really interesting when I read these books, because I think I may be one of the most archetypal instances of obsessive compulsive disorder, because as I go through, they'll go through, and people who have obsessive compulsive disorder, they'll have these kinds of thoughts, and then they'll do these kinds of actions. As I go through that book, I'm on about number 25, and I've pretty checked 24 of the 25. And one thing that makes it difficult for the people suffering obsessive compulsive disorder, because it deals, the obsessions deal with things that are usually unreasonable. And to my understanding, what makes me still sane is that I know that it's unreasonable, but that doesn't make the anxiety that I feel from the thoughts go away. So what the brain starts to do, let's see here. One example that I've read, and I've done this, this used to happen in college, and I remember sitting there thinking, I am absolutely crazy, out of my mind. I need help. I need someone to help me, but you don't want to talk to anybody because who's going to understand? And some people, most people, I don't think will understand. There's this a lot of people who suffer OCD when they drive. They'll think that they caused a car accident, but they don't know about it.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've done that. I don't know how many times, and I don't know how many times maybe. And then, well, you can guess what the compulsion is. The compulsion is to stop where you are and turn around and drive back to wherever you think that could have happened, or however many miles you think that could have happened. And so one of the important concepts to realize about what actually makes something obsessive compulsive disorder is imagine how that's now interrupting your day. For example, when I was driving back from school, it takes an hour to come home. But if I'm stopping and driving back 20 miles to see if I killed anybody, because I think maybe there was 5 seconds there I wasn't paying attention, and then the brain goes, well, maybe you swerved over into the lane just a little bit, and that caused someone else, and you didn't see them, and they swerved over, and they rolled over into a ditch, and you might not even be able to see them, or the corn's up, and they went all the way into the corn, and the brain just starts taking off. And so you start driving back and looking to see if you caused some kind of a car accident, and of course you drive back, and everything's fine. But what happens is, because you went through the behavior, you just fed the monster that is the obsession. So day number two, because on day number one, you gave into the obsession with the compulsion part, which is the behavior to satisfy the obsession. Day number two, you're driving along and you say, oh wait, I didn't pay attention there for 2 seconds. Or maybe I didn't pay attention there. The brain just keeps going. And then it will, and then you go, well, I need to drive back. And then you're like, no, that's crazy. But the anxiety is so much more powerful on day two, because on day one, you validated it by going back and checking to see if everything was okay. So day number two, you drive back and you start forming other obsessions like, okay, now I need to slow down to 40 miles an hour every time I get by a ditch with water in it. It's just wild stuff what the brain can start doing. And then it just, you can see how this can go into a tree that you go, and then you went back and then you drove back and you're like, wait a second, I don't know if I went 40 miles an hour by that one ditch that had water in it. And then so that's just one illustration of how the brain can work. A lot of people deal with contamination, washing hands, stuff like that. I've dealt with that. Chemicals, dealing with stuff like that. Sometimes one of the common ones is, and this is what really makes them feel crazy, is they'll have just I should be careful what I say here. Crazy, like how do you say it? Psychotic. Let me use an example so someone doesn't think that I'm having these thoughts when I'm around them or something. Like in women who have children, who have OCD, they may talk about a thought will pop into their head while they're bathing their child about drowning the child. Now, that sounds extraordinary probably to most people. And I hear that and I go, yeah, I know exactly what's happening. And it freaks you out, especially when you haven't been diagnosed. And it's again that these thoughts will go into your head that you control. Now, what makes you different from people who actually drown their children and things like that is you have no desire to drown your children. You don't want to drown your children. You're not going to drown your children. And because you're a sane person, that thought that popped in your head, you start going, uh-oh, you're scared of your own brain now and you're now scared of what other people might think because that thought popped into your head. And
Mm-hmm.
it's as though, because of the way that your genetics are and your brain is working, that it's almost like it's messing with you. Like, let me throw something else in there that will give you some kind of shock value.
Mm-hmm.
And there's therapies and depending upon who you talk to, medications to help with those things over time. Um, uh,
Yeah, you throughout knowing you and hearing you talk about this has given me a much greater awareness for OCD. Because before I almost thought it was well, you want it this way and that's it. But it's more than that, and you kind of flushing out the anxiety side of things
yeah,
as well as how that impacts your behavior in the subsequent days. To me, that speaks
yeah,
to the depths of it. It's just not, well, I need this in order. It's deeper than that. But
yeah.
as you think about this and your journey through this, can you speak to how God has helped you thrive through this?
Yeah, yeah. Although I get very frustrated, but as I get older, and as we talk about in church, someone is born without two legs, or let's say someone who the better case is someone who was because I've heard about people like this. They were born being able to hear just fine, and let's say they were a musician, for example. Some may know that Beethoven went deaf in his older years, that I think by the time he wrote the Ninth Symphony, I think he was completely deaf. So imagine someone, especially a musician, who was born being able to hear. And then you get to a point where you can't hear anymore. You you get to a point where you can't hear anymore, and you know what it's actually like to hear, and you constantly pray and you ask God to help you and to heal you, and it doesn't happen. You ask God to heal you, and it doesn't happen. So, like, say you were able to hear and then you can't hear, and that's incredibly life changing and frustrating. And you pray over and over for God to heal you, and it doesn't happen. And I've gone through a lot of my life being very angry about that. So, but that's one thing that I've come to learn is that sometimes God, for whatever reason, I mean, as much as we believe, I believe He can heal me. I believe He can heal the person who loses their hearing. I believe He can heal the person who was born without two legs. He can put them back on. For some reason, He doesn't. And how has that impacted my life? Well, especially how has God impacted my life, and how has that impacted my life with God? Well, it's taught me to realize, and it's helped to give me perspective, especially. And I know I've heard this in sermons that we talk about the great hope, and then sometimes we contrast it, or we discuss that with this idea of prosperity gospel, where if we become Christians, then God is going to heal all of our pains. He's going to make everything better. And then sometimes it's taken to higher levels where then that means that we're going to be financially blessed, and we're going to be materially blessed, and all kinds of things. But what it actually means is that great hope is that in my opinion, it's talking about what happens, and you're preaching about it right now in that next age when Jesus' kingdom is set up. And it talks about then things are all made better. So it's really it gives me perspective, that, and it's helped me to realize that. And then it helps my Christian faith, and in talking to others, and that I don't broadcast and market this idea of this quick kind of quid pro quo Christianity, where you go to the altar, you say these words, you now say that I'm saved, and now everything gets better, and you get a whole bunch of stuff. Quite to the contrary, I believe that God heals and He can do anything. But my perspective's really changed. The Lord's Prayer, and I know the board's talking about this. What is prayer, and how do you pray? And I'm really leaning towards the Lord's Prayer itself. Like it talks about in the Scripture, God knows our wants. He knows what we need before we even ask it. But I think a lot of prayer is conforming our will to His, and that's a lot of our Christian walk. This idea that we get saved, and then now He's our genie, and we use Him as a genie for all kinds of things. Political genie. I need you to restore the United States. My personal genie. I need you to heal this obsessive compulsive disorder, so that I can, because I know, like the analogy I used, if someone could hear, before the condition really manifests itself, for me, again, it was archetypal. They say, 17, 18, 19 years old. That's especially about 19-year-olds. It really hit. I know what it's like to live life without that constraint before 19 years old, when it really hit. So God, can't you return me back to that kind of existence? And do you not remember my abilities, the things that I can do when I'm not constrained physically by this stuff? Mm-hmm. And how does this change my life? What's my perspective? That's not how it works. He might, but sometimes, because I think we have free will, we work with what we have, and that's one thing I've really tried to do is, and how did it impact my life? Well, that's a huge reason why I bounced around from colleges to colleges, because at the core was I knew what I was able to do, especially musically. Mm-hmm. And now I had this condition that was manifesting me physically, and I won't, for hours could go into the details of how that happens. And I would have to show up and do something where I'm performing at a level of maybe even 50% of what I know I can do. And so then that wasn't acceptable to me. And so often someone who has OCD there's all these kinds of like cognitive disorders. And one of them is called all or nothing thinking. So the idea was in my brain is if I can't do it the way I know I'm able to, the way I was originally born to be able to it, I'm not going to do it. And then I wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And so what I really learned is that, especially through Scripture and looking at what the apostles dealt with and things like that, is just start putting one foot in front of the other. And sometimes you may fail miserably, and no one's going to know that the reason you failed is not because you didn't practice or you didn't prepare or whatever you're trying to do, is because the sickness that you have, and it's just as valid as someone who has some kind of other illness that's manifesting itself physically, that you're just going to have to deal with that and do what God wants you to do. And by no means have I been highly successful at that, but I try to, because to me, if I just quit because it's not perfect, then that's what the forces that oppose God want to have happen. They want us all to quit. And maybe what was in my mind, that what I was supposed to do for God wasn't his plan. It's also helped me to realize who's in charge, that maybe I say, God, hey, all these things I could have done and I can't do it now. Maybe he didn't want me to. That's give me the perspective of who's in charge and who I need to render my decisions to, in terms of when I start planning, well, what is it, the missions or whatever I'm supposed to do to concede to him. So yeah, it has, how's it impacted my life? And it's also helped me into sympathize and actually sometimes help others, and especially others who are Christians, who are not only necessarily maybe going through OCD, but they're going through some kind of other form of mental illness. And because of its very nature, like I said, people don't want to talk about it because they think I'm crazy. And by the very nature, in talking to others, and this is kind of cliche, but often what can happen in the church, maybe not so much in today's church, but maybe going back 10, 20 years, someone shows up and says, I have some kind of mental illness, like obsessive compulsive disorder. And the church's response, not everyone's, was that you just need to pray more, or you need to have more faith. That's one of the, and I know you didn't ask this question. I think, for those listening, I'd be happy to talk with you. But one thing I've learned over time, yeah, God heals. But just like there reaches a point that you don't come to the music director because you hurt your ankle, you go to the orthopedic surgeon, and you may have to have surgery or something done. That there are professionals out there, and that's what was so. And I think God can work through those people, and I think it's important to have a Christian professional, but. People that can help you through. There's cognitive ways to approach things, and then behavioral approaches as well, and different combinations.
Well, it sounds like one of the biggest things is God has given you awareness of who you are, and has helped you accept that. Because until you have an awareness and an acceptance, you're going to be playing shoulda, coulda, woulda games, and why can't you do this or why can't you do that? And so to me, that speaks volume to your willingness to allow Jesus to speak into your life, because it's you recognize it's not about you. Could Beethoven have done more if he could have continued to hear? Could you have done more if God had removed this barrier or that barrier? And we can play those games all day long, but would you agree that the awareness and the acceptance are two big steps that people need to take when they're dealing with any type of mental disorder?
Oh yeah. It's, just like alcoholism. The first thing, but what often happens too is there can be elements of OCD and some of these other things in everybody that. And sometimes one will talk about these things and they'll go, oh yeah, I've done that. And then, oh, I must have OCD. Maybe. But I mentioned something earlier. I talked about how driving back was interfering with my daily life. And obviously, you could spend 5 hours a day now driving back and forth trying to see what happened. A lot of it has to deal with, to my understanding, is it starting to interfere with your daily life, like that you're not able to interact with your family, your kids, and even sometimes it can be qualified by the amount of time that you're spending so many times on the compulsions, or you're not able to go to work and things like that. So um, um, I can't remember. I was trying to roll that into, is that one of the big things in my life that it gave me perspective? Yes.
Yeah.
I often ask God, did you really need to do it that way? Could I have not gotten perspective some other way? I don't know. I don't think he necessarily gave it to me. I don't think he gave it to me. I think, again, there's free will, and I have this, and then we make the most of it. But I would add that in how has it helped my life? I think it has helped in having an understanding, even just sometimes with music. Sometimes I've had people who maybe have a related condition, and it helps me to understand a little better. Well, in talking to them, you just see people's eyes light up when they see that you understand. They run into someone who understands, and they don't have that very often. But then it also helps you in knowing how to interact with folks that are having those problems. And one way is, for example, let's use another example. Let's say my wife is driving, to use this example we've been using, and I'm in, because this can totally happen, because then families really have to deal with someone who has OCD, and sometimes I think in the counseling they'll even talk to the family and help them. How do you help this person? And I might think that we both weren't watching, and she may have killed somebody. So I'm having huge anxiety, and I need her to start driving back and on things. And from what I've read, and this is kind of the behavioral therapy, the worst thing she can do is to turn that car around to go help me. And often what happens is those who don't understand these things, they'll immediately react in a certain way that one would naturally react. And because one doesn't understand, sometimes it can be not a very supportive move to actually help the person. And how has this helped me? In my life, perspective, yes, but it's also helped me to deal with other people maybe who are going through these kinds of things. And so I would add that too.
That makes sense.
And giving that to me, but sometimes I'm like, did I really need to have it? But it seems that that's what he wants me to have. And so I think that has hopefully been a blessing to others as well.
Well, I know our conversation today and earlier conversations have helped me gain a broader perspective and to see maybe greater empathy for others. And particularly, I'm grateful for your openness and willingness, not only to share about this, but also to speak to how God has helped you through this. Because regardless of where we are, God can help us thrive. And I think you are you just have a testimony of how God can use us where we are. He can use us how we are created. And it's a matter of leaning into the calling that Jesus has given us. So I appreciate you sharing. Do you have any final comments that you would like to share today?
Thanks for the opportunity to share. If ever someone wants to talk about these things, I'm happy to talk about them. That's kind of the issue, especially when folks are first dealing with these kinds of things, is that it's very embarrassing to share the kind of personal information with folks. But I don't know if I have any more pride left, so I'd be glad to sit down and talk with anybody. I enjoy doing what I'm doing at the church, and hopefully it doesn't sound like I'm complaining. And every day is a hard day for me. I've been very blessed, and like I say, when the psychiatrist, I'll go in for a medication update, and he'll ask me how I'm doing, and if the question is, "Are you healed?" No. if the question is, are you able to live with this, and are you um, uh, doing the best that you can? You're not just totally falling off the cliff like has happened a few times.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is yeah. I'm the new fine, which has been defined over the years with this condition. According to that fine, yeah, I'm doing fine. So I would say that I've been blessed. I'm still here, and I've had great opportunities, especially at the church. So thank you, Pastor, for the opportunities. Thank you to the church for those opportunities.
Yeah. Well, we are grateful for you and your work, and you do such a phenomenal job. And I'm also thankful for your willingness to share. And I know you'll be a blessing to others through your openness and transparency and the evidence of what God has helped you through and how God has helped you. So I appreciate you. Thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life. And please subscribe to never miss an episode.